Guys, after the Carlos Takam versus Joseph Parker fight, I recorded a post-fight video, and that's still online. It had my views following on from the initial fight. I think currently it's sitting at about 9,000 views, so it's one of the most viewed videos that I've actually ever done since being on YouTube. So first and foremost, shout out to everyone who tunes in from New Zealand and everyone who supports the channel. It's much appreciated. But off the back of that video, I received numerous messages asking me to discuss Joseph Parker in various matchups. Parker Joshua, Parker Haye, Parker Dillian Whyte, Parker David Price. There's all of this talk out there as to Joseph Parker versus heavyweight opponents, and also a lot of questions about how I would manage him if I was in charge of, choosing his opponents and providing an outline to his career. So, first and foremost, I'm not going to break down the Takam fight again because, as I say, I've already done that in the initial video, and if you want to see a breakdown of the fight, you can check that one out. But to summarise on that fight, just briefly, what I'd say is, in the heavyweight division, I would say there is a big gap between top 15 and top 50. And Joseph Parker has proved conclusively with that win that he deserves to be top 15, top 10 to be honest. After that, for me, Carlos Takam was lower end top 10, 9, 10, 11, something like that. And Parker's gone out there, he's beaten, he's deserved the win. Parker has conclusively shown he is capable of that step up in class. However, just as I've said, there's a huge step up between rank 50 and rank 15. I believe there is an equally significant step up between rank 15 and rank 5. What I'm getting at is, if you look at the guys in the lower end of the top 10, let's say Takam, Bermain Stavern, Bryant Jennings, Kubrat Pulev, those guys are very, very solid fighters, and Parker Sony's amongst their mix in my eyes. But if you look at the guys who are just the next level up, there's another big load of improvement needed to step up to that level. And by that level, I'm obviously talking Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, Vladimir Klitschko, David Haye, Anthony Joshua. You could throw in Alexander Povetkin if he isn't banned for the foreseeable future. We'll have to see how that plays out. What I'm getting at is, Parker Sony's top 10, but so he's top 5, so he's in that real elite. There's another step up needed. And I've got to say, the manner of his victory against Carlos Takam has me questioning at this stage whether Joseph Parker is ready for the step up from that top 10 level to the top 5 level today. Now, that's not necessarily a negative. Parker's 24 years old. He's an absolute baby in the heavyweight division. Literally, heavyweights often don't come to their peak till their early to mid 30s. Parker is an absolute baby in the heavyweight division. And the fact that he's top 10 level now, and the fact that he's beating opponents like Carlos Takam now, is hugely commendable. This isn't to criticise him in any way. For me, it's just recognising the fact that the performances that I'm seeing, whilst they are at that top 10 level, I don't see him as quite there yet to join that elite, to join that top 5, given the nature of the division at present. Look, there's a huge amount of positives that you can attribute to Joseph Parker. The athleticism, the power, the offensive punch variety, the combinations, the way he goes to the body. Parker has a huge amount of strings to his bow. Having said that, after this Takam fight, if we're questioning whether Parker can get to the elite, to the world championship level, we've got to acknowledge there are also one or two areas of concern. Stamina was something that to me didn't look, he looked a bit gassed in that fight against Carlos Takam. He looked like he was struggling with his engine at certain points of the fight. His guard his guard is just not there. He needs to work on his guard. And I know it's such a basic thing to say, but I'm talking putting your hands tight in front of your chin. He's not doing that enough. And to be honest, it's part of a wider defensive issue. There's no head movement. He's quite upright. The guard isn't there. He's very easy to time when he's throwing punches. Often he's at his most vulnerable when he's engaging, and he kind of really negates his defence. He's an offensively minded fighter, and when he's throwing down, he negates to keep his defences tight. I also think, apart from some defensive frailty and perhaps one or two stamina questions, there's also real inexperience evident in his game. I've talked about this before, but if you look at that Carlos Takam fight, for me, Parker expends way too much energy needlessly. He was cruising through the early rounds against Carlos Takam. I think he should have looked at Takam, realised Takam was going to be an opponent who was going to be in front of him all night for 12 rounds, and I think he should have just coasted to win those rounds, keeping your energy in reserves. You're in for a 12-round fight, the first 12-round fight of your career. Don't throw combination after combination after combination if you've already won the round clearly after 2.5 minutes. In the 8th round when he did that 50-punch flurry, that's not something you see an experienced fighter doing. Yeah, it's entertaining. Yeah, it's good in a sense that he's looking to push the pace and get the stoppage. But by the same token, it's not sensible in terms of making sure you leave with a win. I have concerns looking at that fight about Parker. His jab, he's got a very good jab. He doesn't use it. He just does not use it enough. I thought he was less comfortable on the inside. I thought where Carlos Takam was sitting on his chest, he didn't like it so much. And I also have concerns. If Carlos Takam is a very solid heavyweight, but he's not a big puncher. Not in the context of the heavyweight division. Had that been Deontay Wilder or Anthony Joshua or Alexander Povetkin or one of those sort of guys landing the punches on Parker that Takam was landing, it could have been a very, very different result in this fight. So, huge credit to Parker. He's got to top 10 age 24. He's got a huge amount of attributes and capabilities. But for me, there's also a lot to work on. The guard, the jab, the inside game, the engine, the stamina, the head movement. And I think generally, gaining more experience against this type of opponent is going to be absolutely key. For me, as I said before in my pre-fight video, there really is no need to rush this guy. If I was managing him, I wouldn't necessarily be considering what's the biggest paycheck I can earn in 2017. I'd be considering what's the biggest paycheck I can earn in 2019. I'd be playing the long game here. I'd be recognising that Joseph Parker potentially has 10 or 12 years ahead of him, and I wouldn't be risking him in fights that he's probably going to lose at this stage. Now, I know some people out there have the attitude that a loss isn't a disaster for someone's career. And yeah, I think that's correct. I don't want to get into this Floyd Mayweather thing where every fighter has to have a 0. But also, we've got to remember at the same time that this is heavyweight boxing. These are some of the biggest punchers in the world hitting each other on the chin. These are 6'6", 18-stone men who punch things for a living, connecting with their fist on your guy's chin. And what I've got to say is, for me, to have the attitude a loss won't hurt at this career is not correct. A loss could hurt. A loss could always hurt in heavyweight boxing. It could lead to an injury. It could lead to a career-altering knockout. I mean, look at UK prospect David Price. He was arguably rushed too soon into a fight with a world-level challenger at the time, Tony Thompson, who was a big step up. Price got knocked out in that fight, and the damage that's done he's never recovered from. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen to Parker, but for me, I would like to see Parker fully primed and fully at his best before hitting that world level. And at present, with the holes in his game, he's not there. And those holes could be ironed out if he had another year or two. I'd be trying to throw him in with Romain Stavern, Bryant Jennings, Alexander Ustinov, Alexander Dimitrenko, Johan Depar, Robert Helenius. I'd be trying to throw him in with those sort of guys. Guys who are going to, like Carlos Takam did, take him 10 rounds, take him 12 rounds. guys who are going to test out his defence, guys who are going to show him different things in the ring without necessarily, having the beating of him. What I'm getting at is I would like Parker to have a few more fights where he has immense learning experiences and he faces troublesome competitors, but competitors that fundamentally you'd expect Parker to beat. In my eyes, Parker has the talent, he has the attributes, he has the potential to get to that elite level, but he's not there yet. And I fear if he's rushed in with Anthony Joshua at this stage, it will be to his detriment. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these UK Anthony Joshua fanboys. Joshua is an imminently beatable fighter, and I guess to an extent all guys are in the heavyweight division, and some of the things that Parker brings to the table can cause Joshua real problems. And I certainly don't rule out Joseph Parker winning that fight. I don't rule out Joseph Parker knocking out Anthony Joshua whatsoever. Joshua's untested to an extent. But what I would say is, on the balance of probability, I'd make Anthony Joshua a large favourite going into that matchup. Joshua's a bigger man than Joseph Parker. He actually counters and times very well from range. And for me, with Joseph Parker's inability to keep a well-constructed guard for the duration of a fight, with his static head, with no head movement, with his upright stance, I've got to say Anthony Joshua is going to hit Joseph Parker. He's going to be able to catch him early. Let's not forget, Carlos Takam was able to do it. Jason Bergman was able to do it. We've seen other fighters back in the past able to do it. Let's not forget in early fights when we saw Parker have a propensity to get into a war and get cut and, abandon his fundamentals. Joshua will hit Parker, and based on Parker's current resume, Joshua's going to hit Joseph Parker a lot harder than he's been hit before. And I'm just not quite sure he's ready for that test just yet. And a loss to Anthony Joshua, it doesn't mean he needs to retire, it doesn't mean his career is over, nothing like that. But you're playing with fire. Knockouts like that can change the course of a career. Someone can be injured permanently. Someone can be psychologically damaged for the foreseeable. For me, it's too soon. And Joseph Parker would have a much better chance of actually going out and winning that fight if he was given a full build-up with more learning fights of this nature, of the calm nature. Those are exactly the right kind of fights for him at this stage. So it was slightly to my surprise when it was announced that on the 21st of July, Joseph Parker will be stepping into the ring with a guy, and forgive me, I'm going to pronounce his name incorrectly here. The first name's Solomon, the second name, my reading of it is Haumano. Forgive me as I say, I'm sorry I'm going to pronounce that wrongly. Now the name does ring a bell very vaguely. I'm not going to lie, off the top of my head, I don't remember seeing him fight, and I haven't had the time to look up his fights before making this video. I'll definitely do another video in advance of the fight to give some prediction as to how I think that fight's going to go when I've researched Haumano. But to be honest, his box rec, and I know boxing isn't a game played on paper, so we can't judge it purely by box rec. Styles make fights, but I've got to say his box rec doesn't read overly well. 24 wins, 2 losses, 2 draws. Of the 24 wins, 21 of them have come by knockout, so the guy can clearly hit a bit, at least at some level. And of his 2 losses, 1 has come by knockout loss. So yeah, the record isn't terrible on paper, but here's the problem. 40 years old, so certainly in the autumn, if not winter of his career. 6'2", so certainly a small guy that's not going to help prepare Parker for the Joshuas and Furies of this world. No real notable wins on his record. He knocked out Marcelo Nascimento, but let's be honest. Has this Haumano beaten anyone in the top 50? Has he beaten anyone in the top 100? Most worryingly, he was KO'd by Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson is known as a high-level journeyman gatekeeper type. I know Kevin Johnson in his day was a decent fighter. I know he stopped Alex Leopai, but a guy who got stopped by Kevin Johnson, a guy who's now 40 years old, a smaller heavyweight, is he going to give Joseph Parker the test he needs? Is he going to give Joseph Parker the learning experiences he needs? Probably not. This is a massive step down from Carlos Takam, but it's also a massive step down below some of the other opponents Parker's faced. Cali Meehan, Bowie Tupu, Jakob Suglam, Jason Petway. In my eyes, those guys are possibly, on paper, a level above this opponent. I know the opponent's a domestic opponent, he's a Kiwi. I know there's probably some interest and some money in that fight in New Zealand, but we're talking about Joseph Parker fighting for a world title against Anthony Joshua in 6-7 months. There's not a huge amount of time to give him the learning experiences he needs here, and they've chosen this guy. For me, that's very disappointing. That's very disappointing. And if they decide to swerve the Joshua mandatory, if they decide to take their time with Joe, give him 2 or 3 years, build him up, challenge again when he's 27, 28, then it's more acceptable. But if he's moving towards the big fights sooner, which it appears that he is, this is a poor opponent. He's rated 74 on BoxRec. To be honest, that's probably quite charitable. And based on the level of opponent he's beaten, it is charitable. And you just got to say it's a massive step down from Carlos Takam. Is this going to give Joseph Parker the experience he needs? Is this going to fill in the gaps that he sowed in his game following on from that fight against Carlos Takam? And I've got to say, for my money, I think that's unlikely. And I think it's a poor choice of an opponent on that basis. As I say, I'm going to look into it in more detail. I'm going to watch some of the opponents' old fights, and maybe I'll change my mind. I'll certainly do another video on it. But it's a disappointing matchup. Is my initial reaction. A lot of people have been asking me about Parker versus Dillian Whyte. For me, that's a wholly unrealistic fight. Dillian Whyte is en route to very, very big things with the UK pay-per-view market. Dillian Whyte is going to be targeting an Anthony Joshua rematch. That fight is a mega money matchup in the UK. You guys in New Zealand, to give you some example, for the first fight, which was for the British title, Joshua was rumoured to earn £3 million for that fight. Dillian Whyte was rumoured to earn £500,000 for that fight. The rematch for a world title, with the sort of drama surrounding the two guys, it's going to blow those figures out of the water. Dillian Whyte is going to go down that route. That fight is going to be built to a massive rematch. Is Dillian Whyte going to want to take a 50-50 fight with a guy like Joseph Parker? Certainly not. Maybe Dillian Whyte would take any fight. Dillian Whyte is a warrior, but Dillian Whyte's promoters, Dillian Whyte's teams are not going to position him that way. He'd also want mega money for a fight like that. It's a very risky fight, and I think the money he'd require to take that fight means it would have to be a pay-per-view fight in the UK, and Whyte versus Parker is nowhere near a big enough fight at this stage to demand pay-per-view revenue. So for me, that's a very unrealistic fight. You've also got to say, perhaps it's unrealistic from the Parker side. The fact they're putting him in with Solomon Haumano shows that either, number one, they don't want to risk him taking a loss before his mandatory against Joshua, or number two, they're not so confident about him after the Takam fight, and with that potentially being the case, why would they want to stick him in with Dillian Whyte? For me, if I had to pick a winner in that fight, I'd probably edge to Parker. I think Parker's the cleaner boxer. I think he's got a smarter work from the outside. But I do think Parker would need to use his jab more in that fight, and I think he'd be liable to get knocked out if he kept his hands low, because Dillian Whyte is a very, very hard puncher, and it'd be a risky fight for both men, but I'd slightly lean to Parker. Another fight people are talking about is Haye versus Parker. For me, again, another wildly unrealistic matchup. David Haye, he's targeting the mega money fights, and until he gets those mega money fights against Joshua, against Tyson Fury, against Deontay Wilder, he is not taking any risks. I mean, look at the level of opponent he's been fighting since his return. Mark Demori, Arnold Jar, Shannon Briggs. He's not going to step in with a young lion like Joseph Parker. It's just not the way he's operating. Haye's self-promoted as well. He's not going to be paying big money for opponents at this stage. He's looking for an affordable, beatable opponents en route to the mega money fights. And at this point, Joseph Parker doesn't fit into the mould of the low-level opponents that Haye's been fighting. Also, though, doesn't fit into the mega money matchups. So for me, that's another unrealistic matchup. Again, if you're pushing me for a winner, Haye beats Parker at this stage. You can't really beat David Haye if your defence is that poor, I'm afraid. David Haye is a precision puncher. He hits very, very, very hard, and he's extremely explosive. And he finishes well. You know, he didn't finish overly well against Jar Jar, funnily enough, but he's a very good finisher. And I think he'd have Joseph Parker in trouble very quickly with Parker's current defensive structure. And I don't think he'd let him off the hook. So those fights are banded around a lot. For me, Parker would be unwise to take those fights. What he needs to do for me is focus on the more learning fights. You know, the fights where he's maybe fighting established gatekeeper, high-level journeyman types. You know, the guys of the Ustinov mould, guys of the Brian Jennings mould. You know, those are the type of fights which are gonna really benefit him, rather than those, 50-50 classes with Dillian Whyte and David Haye. If he's inclined to take 50-50 fights like that, he may as well leap straight into the Joshua fight. Joshua's a bigger money fight, and to be honest, stylistically, may actually be a better match for Parker. But, that's my advice all in all. Just to summarise, Parker is a very credible fighter. He's top 10. He's a great achievement to be at that position at such a young age. But there's a lot of holes in his game to get from top 10 to top 5. And for me, what he needs to do is don't rush. Fight more opponents like Carlos Takam, not like Solomon Haumano. And, if he is going to take the AJ mandatory, Anthony Joshua mandatory in the next 6 months, my inclination at this stage is it's probably too early for him. If he leaves it a year or two, has more and more matchups like the Carlos Takam fight to work on his defensive frailties and to gain more experience, it could be a far more winnable fight for him. In the meantime, talk of Haye, talk of Dillian Whyte, talk of David Price. They're very, very unrealistic fights. Due to Parker's lack of defence, I'd give anyone with real power a reasonable chance of causing the upset and beating Parker. But as I say, I see those fights as unrealistic anyway. I think he'd be better off focusing on, as I say, the Dimitrienko's, the Steverns of this world. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Let me know your thoughts on the opponent. You've probably seen more of him than I have. How do you rate him? Do you see Parker blowing him out of there in a round or two, or do you think he can provide more of a test than that? Do you think they'd be sensible to take the time with Parker? Should he rush straight into the Joshua fight? And, how do you see that matchup going if it is to occur next? Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. I'd very much appreciate it. Many thanks for watching.